We are just 1 week away from the next round of debates in the Democratic primary. Like the first round, the candidates are going to take the stage on 2 different days. But are Americans even interested?
According to a report by Axios, interest in the Democratic primary plunged last week. Articles about the candidates generate roughly 6.5 million social media interactions, while stories about President Trump generated 23.2 million. Joining us now with his insight on the debates, the 2020 general election, the president's feud with the squad, is the co-founder of Justice Democrats, Kyle Kulinski. He's the host and producer of the Kyle Kulinski Show. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Kyle, I think right off the bat what I want to get to is about your thoughts on the Democratic Party, this race right now, and really regarding Bernie Sanders. His political obituary has been written 1 million times. They say that he's fallen to 5th or 6th or whatever. But to me and to Crystal, I mean, he seems like behind Joe Biden, the forebearer in the Democratic primary. Just tell us about the treatment of Bernie Sanders and how you think his campaign stands right now.
Well, I mean, he's been treated terribly by the media. That goes without saying. But I think we're going to see potentially a weird backlash effect in that, almost kind of like Trump in 2016, the more you had establishment outlets coming after him, the more you saw him go up in the polls. And I think a similar thing like that happens with Bernie, because oftentimes the attacks against him are so vacuous and there's just nothing there. And it makes people, even people who are ambivalent about Bernie, go, well, that really doesn't sound quite right. That wasn't quite fair. I'm not sure what you're saying there. And a good example of that was just recently on MSNBC when somebody called him anti-woman and quite literally said, well, I don't know why I think he is, but I just think he is. And of course, when you go to his voting record, it's like the most pro-woman in all of Washington, D.C. So when you say something like that, even people who are on the fence about Bernie are kind of forced to go, I don't know, that seems like you're reaching a little bit. So even though it's terrible to watch the media treat Bernie terribly, it actually might end up helping him. And I would advise him to just kind of lean into it a little bit and, you know, don't shy away from taking on bad actors who are treating you unfairly.
You know, I was just talking about this yesterday, too, and I completely agree with that sort of strategic advice. I mean, the Sanders camp has done an excellent job of building their own media ecosystem, which I think is essential in this landscape and especially for taking on Trump. But some of his best moments were when he was like taking it right to the mainstream media. I think his Fox News town hall, which was somewhat controversial, was really one of his best media moments, and people really responded positively to that because he's good at going in and calling people out and just being himself.
Yeah, Bernie, in my opinion, he's at his best when he's an angry old man, because we all relate to that. People relate to that. And, it makes sense that we relate to it because we live in a country where there's $1.6 trillion in student loan debt. We live in a country where 30 to 40 million Americans don't have health insurance, and 30 to 45,000 Americans die every year because they don't have access to basic health care. We live in a country where half of workers make $30,000 a year or less. So people are mad, people are angry, and we want somebody to reflect that, to reflect the dire situation that we're in. And he, by far and away, is the most like that. And, I would say even in the debates and when he's dealing with the media, it's okay, man. Like, when he treats the media with derision and when he treats the other candidates and he scorns and scolds the other candidates, that's a positive thing, because, yes, it's ridiculous that we're having this discussion in the year 2019, really, we're still debating Medicare for all, as if every other country doesn't have one version or another of a single-payer system. We have the answers to a lot of these questions, and sometimes he feels like he's in the twilight zone when everybody around him is like, no, you're wrong, even though you're obviously factually correct. So,
Kyle,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I want to get at to you, I ask every progressive that comes on this show. Elizabeth Warren has branded her version as economic patriotism. She says we're going to, revamp trade deals, wages, we're going to fundamentally reinvent the system, but kind of within the system. Bernie says no, we're going to have a complete and total political revolution. What is it about that revolution that it makes it more enticing to you than an economic patriotism, or doesn't make it more enticing to you? What do you think?
Well, it's actually interesting because, in my opinion, strategically, you need to do what Bernie is doing to actually get change within the system.
Yeah.
So what Elizabeth Warren is doing is she's calling for that change within the system, but you already watered down your position. You already, conceded and did a half measure up front and, told everybody hey, I'm the person who's going to color within the lines here. Whereas Bernie is coming in strong and saying, no, we need a political revolution. We need top-down change of everything. And when you do that, that's how you get change. Because, a good example of this is Obama and Obamacare. When they started that healthcare negotiation, they went in meekly asking for a public option. And then guess what? The final result was the individual mandate system, which was birthed by the Heritage Foundation, which fundamentally is a conservative plan. So, the crowning accomplishment of the last Democratic president was a right-wing healthcare plan. Now, it was better than nothing, but that this is not what the left wants. This is not what the American people wants, according to the polls.
Yeah.
So you have to fight. You have to overreach in order to get anything done. And Bernie's the only candidate who's even remotely serious about that.
What do you make of, you've got all these, all these different variations on the Medicare for All theme out there now. There's like Medicare for those who want it, and I think CAP just came out with Medicare Extra, whatever that is. What do you make of this?
Very simply, I'll say this. Gaslighting to protect the health insurance industry and Big Pharma. That's all the other options are. That's it. There's Medicare for all or there's nothing. If you want to have a conversation about the kind of single-payer system we have, that's a reasonable conversation. You could say, hey, let's do a UK-style system where it's public funding, so taxpayer money going to public institutions. That's one way to do it. Or you could say we could do the Canadian-style system or the French-style system where you have public funding of private institutions, but there's still that single-payer being the government.
Explain why that principle is so important. Why? Because this is something that, the debate moderators last time really wanted to get all the candidates on the record on. The idea of, will you keep the private insurance system or will you get rid of the private insurance system? Why does that matter so much?
Well, actually, it doesn't even really matter that much because Bernie Sanders' bill allows for supplemental private health insurance. So it doesn't fully ban private health insurance, but what it does say is we're going to have the default be that healthcare is a right in this country. And that's what you get with a single payer system. You don't have to pay a rapacious, mafia-like, for-profit middleman to get the care that you need. So really, with the Medicare for All system, particularly the kind Bernie's pushing for, he says, hey, listen, if you want something that goes above and beyond what's covered, and by the way, everything is covered, but if you want something like plastic surgery, for example, well, then sure, you can get some sort of private health insurance and do it that way, but the default is going to be everybody's covered, full stop, and it saves money like every other developed country in the world.
Kyle, another thing I want to get at with you is about the topic of immigration. I know it's something you talk about, and it's something that, look, I'm a conservative, and the way I look at it is that but I'm also an economic populist, and I look at this and I say I think it's shooting yourself in the foot in order to embrace some of the immigration policies that we saw on the stage, particularly health insurance for illegal immigrants and decriminalizing crossing the border. Does the immigration stances of some of the progressives concern you about their electoral chances in the future?
Well, maybe some of their rhetoric does, but when you actually look at the policies they're proposing, it's not what they're making it sound like. So when they say decriminalize border crossings, that's not totally true because I think the person who was leading on that was Julian Castro. And when he goes into detail, he talks about how, no, I just want to change a border crossing from a misdemeanor to a civil offense. And the reason why he wants to change it to a civil offense is that we could stop the breakup of families at the border.
Right.
Full stop. So when you hear it explained like that, it actually makes a lot of sense. However, to your initial point, yeah, I would advise the Democrats, this is not something you lead with in the conversation because this is not something that wins elections. Now, we could have a conversation about morally what's the correct answer, ethically what's the correct answer, what should the unified position of the Democratic Party be on immigration. But yes, you would always want to stress in these debates and in these conversations that we're talking about giving all Americans health care. And whenever the right tries to straw man, like, oh, you just want to give illegal immigrants free health care. Well, the response is, we want to give Americans free health care too, and the right doesn't even want to give Americans free health care. So really? This is the conversation that we're having?
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, but I think it also underscores why it's so important that healthcare truly be universal, because I think people would rightly be outraged if you put undocumented immigrants in line ahead of any Americans in terms of getting decent healthcare coverage. We've got more for you, Kyle. If you can stick around for a couple minutes, we've just got to stop down really quick, and then we'll be back with more from Kyle. We're back with more from Kyle Kulinski. And Kyle, I think I told you this, but like literally every time that we post something on YouTube, at least one of our commenters says you have to have Kyle Kulinski
That's true.
on. So I already wanted you to have you on, just for the record, but also there was a clamoring, a mass clamoring of support for your appearance on the show. So thank you.
Flattered. Appreciate that.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about this whole thing with the squad and the president, and in particular, I believe there's a piece on BuzzFeed talking about how Ilhan Omar's anti-Semitism has become a load-bearing myth in American politics. What's your view of Congresswoman Omar in particular, who has really in particular come in for attacks from the president and from the right?
I mean, she's been smeared more viciously than maybe I've seen anybody. Yeah, it's really wild to see what they're doing. And they're actually putting her in danger, too. And I don't say that lightly, because you have the president of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, going out there and arguing, just flat out saying she's pro-Al-Qaeda. Which is like, are you serious, man? Like, did you really just say that? Do you understand the danger that you're putting her in? Obviously, that's not true. And then furthermore, this is the president that just did a multi-billion-dollar weapons deal with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia turns right around and funds jihadist rebels on the ground in Yemen and does it in Syria as well. So if anybody is, like, in a weird roundabout way supporting Al-Qaeda, I got bad news for you, Trump. It would be you. So, but yeah, the stuff about anti-Semitism, I mean, if you look at what she said that they're accusing her of anti-Semitism over, all she said was that AIPAC gives money to politicians, and then politicians do the bidding of AIPAC, which is only 100% factually true. And then people turn around and say, well, yeah, but she singled out Israel, which is also not true, because she said it about Saudi Arabia as well. And when she said it about Saudi Arabia, nobody called her an Islamophobe. So they really are singling her out for some of the most vicious criticism I've ever seen. And the thing about Ilhan that's so great is that as they're viciously smearing her, look at what she's doing. She is, her main issue, as far as I could tell, is really ending these dumb wars. And I find it so ironic that here she is actually fighting on this issue that Trump voters said they cared about when they voted for Trump. Because half the time on the campaign trail, Donald Trump was talking about how we need to stop these dumb wars and rebuild our infrastructure. Along comes Ilhan Omar, one of the first 2 Muslim congresswomen in American history. She's fighting on those issues, and they hate her. So it tells you something about how rational, the view of Ilhan Omar is coming from the right. And even on the corporate Democratic side, too, to be fair.
Yeah, Kyle, I think what the Rain thing that you're getting at is about a difference in why the war should end. So the Trump voter would say the wars need to end so we can focus on here at home. America is still the greatest country on earth. What we hear from AOC and from Ilhan is really America is the most flawed country on earth. We need to remove all of our troops, and then we need to have some sort of national reconciliation with how terrible we are. I'm not saying that this is necessarily true, an accurate representation of their views, but that's how it's perceived. So the perception is that Ilhan Omar does not respect the United States of America and wants to reform and change it, which is scary to people who voted for Trump. Well, do you think that that's a fair concern, or do you understand what I'm getting at here?
I think it is. I understand what you're trying to say, but I think the people that make that argument are so incredibly silly that it's mind-boggling, because here you have a president who ran on Make America Great Again. Again means it ain't that great right now. So Donald Trump can criticize America as vociferously and fiercely as humanly possible, and nobody accuses him of being anti-American. But Ilhan Omar does it, a young Muslim congresswoman, and the argument is she hates America. Well, there's an old quote, I believe it was from one of the founding fathers, I think Thomas Jefferson, and it's dissent is the highest form of patriotism. She's criticizing because she wants to make the country better. She wants to improve it. And the same goes for AOC, same goes for all the Justice Democrats. I mean, look at AOC's first major bill that she teamed up with Bernie Sanders on, stopping usury. I think they capped the interest rate at 12%. That's what they want to do. So as people are viciously smearing her, she's also saying, I'm going to fight for all of the American people and try to make it so that big financial institutions can't rip them off. It really is amazing how Trump has nothing on these people. Nothing. So what does he do? The most unhinged, vile tweets you've ever seen that are insanely bigoted that just accuse them of hating America. There's a reason why the criticism is so vapid and so ridiculous and so non-specific, because he has nothing to say that criticizes them fairly.
I think it's always important to point out that before Congresswoman Omar, sent out the tweet that became controversial and that there was a House censure over and whatever, before any of that happened, there were signs put up by the Republican Party in West Virginia with a picture of her that said that she was proof that we had forgotten about 9/11, okay? Just her showing up as a black woman in a hijab was a trigger to some folks on the right. So I think that's always important to keep in mind. I'm interested, though, to know from a Democratic Party perspective, what do you make of how Nancy Pelosi has handled this whole dynamic? Because Trump didn't get into the mix here until Pelosi started criticizing AOC and Ilhan Omar and the whole squad.
I'm going to let you in on an open secret here. Nancy Pelosi and Democratic leadership are terrified of the Justice Democrats and this new wave of strong, bold, passionate lefties getting into public life. Because they really do represent a fundamental changing of the guard. Because look at everything that they're fighting for. They're fighting for Medicare for all. They're fighting for free college. They're fighting for a living wage. They want to end the wars. They're taking no corporate PAC money, and they took a pledge to take no corporate PAC money. That's the whole point of Justice Democrats, is these are uncorrupted people, so you can trust that they're going to be representatives of the people. Well, all those things I just mentioned are fundamentally the opposite of Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi is a centrist to her core. She's a Washington wheeler and dealer inside and out. She loves those smoke-filled back rooms where they cut deals with Republicans and then they all sip some cocktails and giggle together. She loves that. Well, we're not talking about that with this younger generation. We're not talking about that with the Justice Democrats and these uncorrupted candidates. They are the people who say, no, we have beliefs and we're going to fight for them. And we're not going to back down. And you're not going to get me to, change my view by schmoozing me or whatever, or cutting me a check from a donor. So she realizes, Nancy Pelosi sees the Twitter following of Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She sees all the news stories that cover every move they make. And she knows, oh, wow, our time is limited. Our time meaning the old guard, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and that neoliberal centrist school of democratic thought.
Well, and of course, she's committed to the system as it is, because that's a system that has given her power. So it makes sense just in terms of thinking about where she derives her personal power from. Kyle, thank you for coming on. We really appreciate it. It's great to have you.
Well said.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Coming up, the 2020 Democrats are dropping the positive campaign messaging and picking up the boxing gloves.
Gabbard versus Harris, Booker versus Biden. We're going to get you up to speed with Team Rising next.